There is an issue with the Sig Sauer P320. Absolutely, objectively, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Misha here, and required video, I suppose, because everyone is, but everyone has a unique perspective. And I do actually have some personal news to report. Yeah, we'll talk about the 320, the M18. Funny how the M17's kind of gotten lost in the mix, even though it's the exact same gun, just a little bit longer barrel slide. And ever since this all happened with the death of a very young airman, 21 years old, on the 20th of July, 2025, I've been out here at the cabin, so I don't have many guns relevant with me, and I do not have a 320 with me this time, although we've done plenty of videos on them since the very beginning. And it may actually rain today, which is great, because I've been out here 2 weeks and we've had not one drop of rain, so we'll move under the porch if we have to. I want it to rain. Please rain. It's also great ambiance for this type of video. Like I said, we all have unique perspectives. One thing I think at least is clear about my little channel is I'm in no way on the take or no way associated with Sig Sauer Incorporated New Hampshire, although I am associated in some part with Sig in Switzerland, and there definitely needs to be continual disambiguation of those two companies there, because they are very, very different companies. And I have some interesting news about a certain M18. Not mine. Mine's working fine. However, Jay got one a while back and had a very different experience. Is it possible that a blind guy actually figured out at least one of the causes of issues? Well, we'll get there, because I found something with his that ain't right. But first, I'm a historian. I'm not a technical guy. I'm not a forensics expert. That's more Chris Bartacci. I'm not a gun tuber that goes to all these factories. That's more, military arms channel. I can just talk about history and some personal experience. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to talk about the Sig Sauer company, because I think this is one of those times when the company is actually just as relevant, or even maybe more so, than the gun itself. We'll see. Anyway, done quite a few videos in the past on the history of the M17, M18. You can check those out, including some reservations I had about them from the beginning. However, I'm not going to play it off like I called it. If anything, I've always had kind of a wait-and-see attitude, because that's who I am. The internet tends to bring out the pitchforks. On the other hand, I've seen more and more people defend when there is, stop doing that. Because I am not joining the Yankee Marshal in that thing. That's equally silly. But that's kind of where we're at now. Both sides have put down anchor, and neither will move. Me? I would say I don't give a shit. I do, because lives are at risk. I care about the lives, but as far as being quote-unquote right, no matter picking the side, I don't. Truth is what's interesting to me, because that's where history is. And in time, history, the truth comes out. It might take a year, 5 years, 50 years, or 500 years, but typically, yeah, it happens. So with that, let's dive into history first, because absolutely, this is not a unique event. Yeah, the 320, the uncommanded discharges, no. In fact, this isn't even the first time a death has occurred. Like I said, out here at the cabin, so I can't show you the guns. I'd like to, because I'd like to pull out a Victory model Smith & Wesson. But I don't have one. I do have this, though. Smith & Wesson Model 10-5. Little 2-inch stubby. This is really fun. Of course, this is made in the 60s, so it is not really relevant to this, but we can talk about the Victory models going back to 1942, because unfortunately, a serviceman lost his life to a revolver, something you would think by the 1940s would be just de rigueur, very standard. But before we get there, you know the deal. Please like, share, subscribe, help out on Patreon. I actually just posted a very personal, private video over on Patreon about me and my kind of life, so check that out if you're interested. But yeah, let's talk about the victory model issue. So when the U.S. joined the Second World War, it needed guns. Obviously, the 1911 A1 was the standard, and that would mostly kind of go to Europe in the Army. But the Army Air Corps, later the Army Air Force, would kind of go for revolvers for different reasons, even 2-inchers in some cases. The Navy and the Marines also did revolvers. Told you it was going to storm. Maybe I'm filling drops. I'd run in just a second. But that's how that was. And so they contracted with Colt to get some revolvers, but they were only able to produce a few. The Commando, Smith & Wesson, that was the big name. They had the M&P, and they would simplify it to the victory model. And they started issuing these in the hundreds of thousands to the U.S., the British, Commonwealth, you know, all kinds of things. Double action, 38 caliber revolver. Very, very standard. Detectives have carried these for decades. You wouldn't think there was any issues. And there really wasn't until you started putting these in the hands of thousands upon thousands of soldiers in a stressful combat environment, many of which maybe had never handled the handgun. And then issues appeared. In the beginning, there were just handfuls of reports of negligent, accidental discharges, which today we would call uncommitted discharges. But then in 1944, a Navy seaman, or was it naval aviator, lost his life. Yeah, history is a little vague. I could not find a name even, but there seems to be enough credible reports, especially with the evidence from Smith & Wesson, that, yeah, apparently either a seaman working on a ship dropped one of these and it hit the deck, or an aviator getting into his, we'll say Hellcat, because I think the F-6 Hellcat is a beautiful airplane, dropped it, and it was in the holster, which kind of makes me wonder, how did he drop the whole holster? At least this is the story. And it went off. Why did it go off? The hammer. The original ones really didn't have a hammer block safety. And whereas your old cowboys would carry one on an empty chamber, in World War II, they didn't. So it bounced enough and hit a primer, presumably pointed up at him, and boom, one less serviceman for the war. And that was actually not even the first time an issue had really popped up. I just happened to have this Colt on an Essex frame out here with me. Yeah, early on, in 1911, there were a lot of safety concerns. That's one reason we got the grip safety. And the manual safety here. The first versions, Browning design, didn't have the manual, but they were concerned, because these were originally kind of intended for cavalry. Funny thing is, this gun and your 1911 A1s still didn't have a firing pin block safety. It was a known thing that if you drop this, especially muzzle, there could be enough inertia on the firing pin or hammer that it could go off. This is why the Series 80 went into effect. Other manufacturers took different tacks, but the 1911 and 1911 A1, they were not drop safe and never really were in military service. They worked around them. But it did have one issue early on that had to be addressed. Essentially, the first slides made up until 1918 weren't properly heat treated. Hardly at all. So they actually had to halt production, revise the heat treat process, because they were having wear in the locking lug area and even cracking. And, you know, back to the Smith here, it does get down to response. Colt, there was an issue, they addressed it. Smith & Wesson very rapidly introduced a much improved spring-loaded firing pin or hammer block safety in here that only means the trigger can go all the way forward. Yep, gonna have to go in. But you know what? It's cooling off, so I'm not complaining. Let's go under the porch and keep this up. Here we are. It's actually great that I actually bought two of the same exact swings, so it makes things going easier. Colt revised the heat treat, and by World War II, the whole slide was heat treated, and that addressed that premature wear cracking issue, but the not being drop safe issue never was. Smith & Wesson did such a good job with theirs, and just, you know, owning it, that it's a style that would exist until this gun was made and beyond. And of course, older guns were retrofit. They sent out instructions to unit armorers on what to do. And newer ones, you can tell these, you know, they had the V prefix serial. If it was retrofit, you'd have an S put at the end of the serial. And if it came from the factory after 1944 with the updated safety, it would have the VS prefix. Cool. They took care of it, and it worked. Unfortunately, someone did lose their life, but that is war. That is combat, unfortunately. Talking about the heat treat on the slides here, that's not at all the most famous heat treat issue we think of, though, when it comes to U.S. small arms. No, that honor obviously goes to the 1903. Not just Springfields, Rock Islands too. The whole low serial number thing, which cracks me up because serials actually collectively go over 1 million. Yeah, I think the cutoff line is typically around 800,000 for Springfield and 250 to 300,000 at Rock Island. Yeah, they were found to have improper heat-treated receivers, and for that matter, bolts. You don't hear much about that, but they were using the 19th century style of case hardening, kind of eyeballing it, something I would particularly suck at. And once World War I kicked off, there were failures, and so they had to halt production in 1918. Luckily, the 1917 infield was available, and so it kind of filled the gap. But this led to injuries, 9 or so very serious, and around 3 dozen or so minor. I don't believe any deaths. And they did repeat the failure, the cracking, the shattering of the receivers in a laboratory situation. So they had to revise and kind of go to a more modern heat treat procedure at both factories. They started it back up, and there you go. And a lot of those guns, even earlier serials, served through World War II and beyond. You know. But still, with over 1 million made, you had, let's say, 100 failures. But that was enough. That was enough that today, even on the collector's market, low serial 1903s bring far less than ones made after 1918. And it was one of the steps that kind of led to the end of the armory system and switched over to private companies. And the M1 Garand itself had early issues. They even had some serious speculations about should we have gone with it. You know, there's the 1941 Johnson was a serious kind of competitor. You know, the Garand was adopted in 1936, and up until World War II, there were some that said we'd made a major mistake. Heck, they went from a gas trap system to a gas piston system. They revised the whole way the gun worked. Now, the Garand became, you know, according to Patton, one of the finest implement of battle ever, but it had about 5 years of growing pains. Now, I don't believe any shooters suffered death from it, but then again, rifles and pistols, a little different situation. Anyway, it worked itself out eventually. But even now, I've heard of M1 Garand receivers cracking and stuff. And it carried over into the M14. I don't have an M14 out here, but I have a Springfield Armory M1A Scout. Yeah, the M14 was picked in 1957, and up through really almost all of its production, it had issues. But in 59, 60, they noted bolts with incorrect heat treat, poor accuracy. They even had cracking receivers. This is why M14 production was really slow until about 1961. But even through 63, 64, the White House discovered various weird production issues. And as much as you hear about Vietnam, there were issues with the M14 there, especially with wood stocks. This is a GI stock on this one. Swelling and jamming up and all kinds of stuff. This is why it had such a short service life. And this is actually why the armory system failed. Ultimately, it was decided to quit using government armories to design and produce guns and switch over to private companies, because that's going to work out real well. The M14 was felt to be so ill-equipped and manufacturing going so poorly that the U.S. government, U.S. military, took an unprecedented step and essentially thrust into combat a gun that was in the experimental stages, the XM16E1. Now, I don't have a full rifle out this cabin trip. I actually have this gun. It's a Colt 653. I'll do a video on. But it's an example of a relatively early design. Yeah, and we know the issues there. They led to congressional hearings and investigation. There were letters being written to congressmen saying, my boy died because this gun jammed or otherwise failed in Vietnam. People died because of the XM16E1. That's not insignificant. It was a major controversy at the time, especially because news, TV news, was broadcasting every evening videos and pictures from the conflict. This isn't something you had in World War II or even Korea, not in the same live manner. So Colt got a lot of flack. And they addressed it. While they, rightly pointed out one of the issues was the change of powder in the ammo, and that proper cleaning regimens weren't taught to the soldiers. There were design issues. The chrome chamber appears very quickly, chrome bore a little bit later, and other improvements. The magazines get better, more reliable. And so that's what led to a gun that's still in service today is the M4, M4A1. It matured. Again, though, Colt addressed it. That said, some Colt documents don't always put them in the best light either. You see them being a little hanky. There are reports of, even into the 70s, of maybe them not always shipping guns with inspec barrels that passed everything. But that's a thing for another day, frankly. And of course, that gets us into the 80s, where there was no controversy at all. Actually, if anything, this is when Sig Sauer were the good guys and the underdogs. You're not a Navy SEAL until you've eaten Italian steel, as the old saying used to go. Also, my 92 shrunk. Yeah, I don't actually have an M9 out this go-round. I had my little 81 32. These are really cool, fun guns. I admit it. I'm a Beretta fanboy. I like Beretta's company aesthetics. I like that they're old and family owned. They've made a lot of great guns. They're up there with Walther in my mind. I admit that I'm a Walther fan too. Yeah, but there was a big controversy. This is why the Navy SEALs went with the P320 and a few other agencies. A lot of people thought the Sig Sauer 226 should have won the XM9 trials. And after... mostly, I think it was SEALs were having issues with at least 3 reported incidences in 86 into 87 of the slide coming back and separating and, well, yeah, given a couple of beauty marks to some operators. They switched, and the Navy wasn't too keen on the M9. The Army didn't give a rat's ass, really, until it happened to them in relatively late 87. They had a slide separation failure. And it was able to be repeated about a dozen times in laboratory tests. They were able to separate slides. So obviously they're blaming Beretta. There was talks of canceling the contract. Things got serious, super serious, by 1988. The Army actually refused to take delivery of M9 pistols from the end of 87 through really spring of 88. Beretta kept making them, but yeah, there were major concerns. This is actually what led to Congress ordering the XM10 trials. Maybe to replace the whole thing. Maybe the whole results were off and wrong. Of Of course, Beretta said, we did nothing wrong. Our guns are spec. And the government said, yes, you did. Ultimately, a court found that it was a combination of two factors, but Beretta wasn't really responsible. Yes, the early guns, most all of them that failed, had Italian-made slides. For what it's worth, they also found some cracking in about 25,000 early frames, although the Army determined these were just cosmetic, but still. But this wouldn't have mattered except for the ammunition they were being used with, the 9mm, which was being loaded by Winchester, was made to incorrect specs. So these guns were being fired with the wrong spec ammo. This is why, ultimately, the costs fell on the U.S. government. Because Beretta, even though they didn't feel like they did anything wrong, did own it. They went from the 92F to the 92FS, which did introduce better, stricter metallurgy for slide and frame, sure. But mainly it had the pin retention system where if the back did break off, it would be caught by a mechanism in the frame. So even if it happened, well, no more diet of Italian steel, I suppose. Really cool pistol. Now, this was the 92FS, and they applied for a change to the TDP and was granted, so the M9 didn't get an M9A1 update, and this would be in production by 89, 90, and there you go. And the XM10 trials were very clear. The Beretta still won, and there you go. It's kind of funny how this, or not this one, its bigger brother, was kind of the dog for a while. Even into the early 2000s, there was a lot of calls to go back to the 1911. Then the Marines tried the M45A1, and we saw how well that worked out. And this continues on. The Glock, early on, had complaints. We did the Glock Gen 1 video. I mentioned the whole, the case issue, where if you put a gun in with the one in the chamber, the way the case was originally made, it would fire through the case. They revised it. There's a reason they went from the early black internals to kind of the silver gold. They revised those. Glock leg was a known thing. The HK P7 pistol. There were reports of officers on the East Coast shooting themselves with the P7, even though HK tried to design it to be a safe gun. In fact, as safe as a gun could be. But to some extent, all these companies owned it. I mean, no one wants to say we made a mistake. No one wants financial responsibility. I get that. But it's not the first time it's happened, nor the last. And there's even another type of weapon we haven't talked about yet that had issues. And this is one I was literally in the room with when it happened. Shotguns aren't free from this either. Here's a Ithaca 37. It's an older police gun. And it has a feature that a lot of people really like. You can slam fire these as fast as you can rack it. If you hold down the trigger, it releases the hammer and fires around. This is also one area where the newer Ithacas get criticism. They put a safety in where it won't do that because it was an issue. I was in the room with someone years ago. Now, it was not an Ithaca 37. It was a Winchester 97, but same difference. He went to clear the action, and finger was, I guess, near enough the trigger or something, or it could have been a sear failure. There are reports of older, even 870s, not to mention Winchesters, just being worn and the hammer dropping, and it kaboomed. Now, luckily, he was at least pointing towards, actually, it was a box full of World War II flags, so the pellets basically just went in there. Thank God. But my friend and I were with it because he'd walked in the room. We thought we might be talking to the police all day. We didn't know what happened. That was scary. I was in the room. So as cool as slam firing seems at the range, I completely understand why modern makers, like the Mossberg 500 has a safety against it. All your modern pump shotguns do. And the military experienced issues with this too. because that gentleman was a 60-year-old man who'd been not just in guns all his life, but a gun dealer. He made that mistake. Now, was he being inattentive? Yes, he was. His mind wasn't on what he was doing. But they're not free from safety concerns either. They really are not. And manufacturers had to step in with newer guns as safety concerns change. And I think kind of us walking through history shows you that. The level of safety that's demanded and required in 2025 is not the same level of safety that was required in 1925 or 1945, 1965. Things have changed. And part of this is the news, first off, live news. Part of it is now the internet. As the internet started to kind of take over in the late 90s and early 2000s and really exploded after like 2005 and after the iPhone came out, the situation changed. And then, of course, YouTube here, people will mostly go for videos they see on YouTube, and there's an issue with that. Your feed tells you kind of what you want to see. If you are on the side of the Sig P320 is fine, it's probably going to show you a lot of, well, frankly, Yankee Marshall videos, but others too, saying they can't repeat it. But if you're in the camp that it's the most dangerous implement of war to its own users that's ever existed, you're going to get feeds from lots of places with some more and some less credible reports of figuring out what the problem is. So what is the problem? I picked up a P320 M17 pretty shortly after they came out. Now, I wasn't interested enough to get one of the commemorative guns or even the military contract overrun or surplus guns. Those are too much money. Nah, I waited for the basic M17 to go on sale one day and picked it up for like $450. I can't remember if that was with or without a rebate. That's about my level of interest. And you know what? Jay and I got it out and shot it. This was 2018 by this point probably. And really liked it. So much so that years later, again, kind of finding them on sale, I picked up an M18. I thought about getting one of the exchange kits, but shoot, they were $300-$400 anyway. So at that point, just wait for them to go on sale again for $5 or less and do that. So I picked up that. Jay did too. He liked shooting my M17 so much that he picked up an M18 a couple of years later, around 2021, 2022. And guess what? His was a pile of shit. Now, from what I understand, he did not have reliability issues with it so much as the trigger was terrible. Whereas when we both shot my M17 together, had a nice trigger for a striker gun and a pretty smooth slide and a smooth recoil. Now, by the time I got to handle his M18 a couple of years later, he had essentially rebuilt the whole gun. Just basically keeping the insert and the slide. Even after replacing a lot of parts, you know what I noticed when he first handed it to me? The striker in the slide, you know, when it moves back and forth, was rough as a cob. And this was after he'd fired it. I can only imagine what it was like. And it seemed like the channel cut into the slide was not machined very well, with burrs, maybe kind of crooked, I don't know. But I brought mine out, which my M18 is a current production. It was made in 2024, 2023. We've had them side by side. And my striker moved rather smooth and freely. And his, even after being replaced with a lot of parts and fired several hundred rounds, was still just like, On top of that, when we pulled the triggers, mine had very little movement as you release the striker, pulled it back from the slide to the frame fit, whereas his tilted, and not just, up in the back or, no, it tilted like to the side, like canted itself quite noticeably. That can't be good. I wish I had seen his gun before. But if it was this bad now, what the crap is Sig Sauer turning out? I admit fully, my attitude has been, let's wait till more information comes out on this. Because again, people seem to be more concerned about being right than the truth. And I'm sorry to say, a lot of the big channels they're too close to Sig, and I get that. I've got friends that I'm a ride or die friend. I will defend my friend, and if you're up to Sig and they tell you everything's safe and they show you all their fancy testing facilities and all this, and it has gone through army and military trials and all that, yeah, you are more likely to believe the person right across the table from you with all these documents seeming good, and a company that's been making guns for a while, over internet reports on forums or maybe YouTube videos where you don't know what's going on. I would admit, we don't know if trigger jobs had been attempted on some of the guns. We don't know what ammo was used. We don't know the behind the scenes. We don't know that guy. One analogy I've been using is, if you've got a guy in your town that is just an upstanding citizen, I don't know, he's a preacher, whatever makes upstanding to you. If John Smith says, my gun went off, you're going to believe him. But if someone who's known to be the town drunk, we'll call him Rusty Shackelford, tells you, my gun ran off, and if he's got a reputation around town for being a tall teller or a drunk or a liar, you'd be like, sure it did, Rusty. We lose that context on YouTube, at least for some people, myself included. I mean, you don't know me locally. Although, again, I did put out a video on the Patreon with a little bit of personal stuff if you'd like to check it out. And so I don't exactly blame some of the big channels when they're at least up with Sig, who have lawyers, who have all this for buying it in. However, with the death of a young airman, this changes things. I know there are some other potential deaths that could be attributed to the 320. Several injuries, several lawsuits, but this seems concrete. And I will also say this. With a civilian, you have a choice of which gun you're going to carry. I personally carry Walthers. I like them. You have your choice. That airman had no choice in carrying his M18. It was an issued gun. He also probably had no choice in holster, ammunition, and other specs. He was forced into that. Out of his control. Other people made decisions that ended a man's life who was barely old enough to drink legally. This changes things. I'm not sure if I can go back and find the video, but when the M17 was adopted, I generally gave it a pretty positive review. Again, my personal gun has been fine with a good trigger, but I gave one caveat, one stipulation. If Sig Sauer Incorporated in New Hampshire can keep their quality control up, their QC, their consistency. That was my one worry about them. And I have legitimate personal reasons to express this. Now, let's talk about the other SIGs real quick. Sig, old company, Neuhausen, Switzerland. Goes back to the 19th century, started making wagons, yada yada. Partnered with Sauer in West Germany in the 70s to make the 220. Went from there. These two partners made the 226, the 228, so the Mark 25, later would be the M11, what have you. Cool. Sig Sauer USA started off as just an importer. Actually, it was Sig Arms, was the original name. And they were down in Virginia. Moved up to New Hampshire. They started making parts and then full guns in the early 21st century. The 229 is one of the first guns that they designed and made. And you know what? The 229 had some marked improvements over the 228. The current Mark 25 that came out about 15 years ago has some marked improvements over the 226. So in the beginning, the U.S. SIGs were as good or better. Now, the ones we got were German-made before because of reasons that we don't need to get in here now. What happened? Well, after the Cold War, Sig Switzerland and all this, and Sig Sauer in Germany, it all fell under the same kind of venture capitalist group, investment group, the Luke and Ortmeyer group, L&O. And so they kind of owned all three, but they were not active. Heck, for a while, a British company, British Aerospace, owned HK in Germany, but HK was left to do its own thing. This is what happened. So the same parent company does own them, but they are separate companies. Switzerland went to the name SAN for about 20 years, went back to Sig Sauer in about 2020, 2021. There were reasons there. And by this point, there was a huge split between Sig in Switzerland and Sig in USA. They basically had nothing to do with each other. What about Sig Sauer in Germany? Well, we got the Kimber kid to thank for them being gone. Ronnie Cohen basically shut them down by pulling that whole shenanigans, by essentially falsifying import-export documents about where things were made, violating German law. You know, he's a criminal in Germany. This led to Sig Sauer GmbH being shut down in what was around 2018, 2019. So they're gone. Sig Switzerland, still there. Sig USA, still there. Still both owned by L&O, but separate companies. They have their own president. They don't really even like each other that much, from what I understand. Fine, whatever. So I wanted to get that disambiguation out of the way. Switzerland has nothing to do with the 320, nothing to do with the MCX, nothing to do with... Those are USA products. Those weren't even made in Germany, although, again, export violations and all that aside, trying to make it look like things were made elsewhere. Whatever. You can check it out. This is just me rambling on the porch, impromptu-like. But why did I worry about their QC? For first, look what Cohen did to Kimber, frankly. When I got into guns, Kimber was an upstanding brand, thought to be better than Colt by many. And then when he left, well, super left him with. I have an experience that goes back to about 2011, and it involves the Sig Sauer Sig 551A1. That was the version of the Sig 556 that took Swiss mags and had a Cerakote kind of Swiss STG W90 finish, had a Swiss buttstock, and had a Swiss style flash hider to make it look like what people were wanting, a 551. And you know what? It was. And you know what? The first 100 they shipped, because they were partnering with CD and NN to do this, they shipped them. They even sent a SIG representative down to do a quality control inspection of all the guns once they got to CD and NN. Cool. They were supposed to be kind of a special edition, special CD&N exclusive thing. And the first ones were great. I got one. That was the first video we did on this channel. The very first one. Because there were not people out there. I thought highly of it. And my gun was great. And then Sig Sauer USA did what Sig Sauer USA often does. They started cutting corners. They quit quality control inspecting the next batches. Later ones didn't have that special Swiss flash hider. They just had an A1 flash hider. Shoot, even after that, they quit putting Swiss buttstocks on them and went to some whatever no-name one. And worst of all, the quality control got bad. In fact, I sold one to a friend on a forum. He had to send it back. And I felt terrible. I mean, I didn't know it. It wasn't an overt issue till you fired it. I sold one to a friend thinking this is a great gun. And to his credit, he didn't blame me. It happens. But it goes to show you, they went from being hand inspected on both ends to using whatever parts and just downhill. They literally murdered the Sig 556, Sig 551 brand name so they could introduce their whatever they call them, basically their own guns. They weren't interested in the Swiss gun. And as for CD&N, their partner, they screwed them over. They pointed out, well, you never actually had an exclusive. So by 2012, 2013, they started selling the 551 A1s to other people and even undercutting their original kind of agreed upon MSRP. Technically not illegal, but pretty scummy. And they did the same thing to Colorado gun sales. Shortly after the success of the 551A1, M+M, Colorado gun sales import brand, got a huge coup. They, for the first time since the 80s and 90s, imported real SG-55X guns from Switzerland. And for the very first time, we had semi-automatic 5.53s here. They were great. And they priced them below what pre-bans were going for, around $4,000 or so. And Sig Sauer screwed them. Because M+M did not have a partnership, an exclusivity agreement with SAN, still using that name at the time, in Switzerland, Sig Sauer USA swooped in, who had no interest at all in importing the 5.53 or 5.51 before, and bullied M+M out. They basically pulled some strings and pointed out some stuff and switched future imports from M+M, Colorado Gun Sales, to Sig Sauer USA. There's evidence of this because there was a batch of guns that had both import marks. They had the Colorado Gun Sales marks on one side and then the Sig Sauer USA. That meant those guns were destined for CGS and went through Sig, and they undercut them. And then to be complete assholes, they priced them at $3,000 and then $2,500. They sold them at or below cost just to wreck the market. And after they did that, you know what they did? They didn't import anymore. They literally came in just to shut that down because they saw that as competition, as a threat, even though they weren't interested in their 5.56, 5.51A1 series and wanted to shut it down too, to switch over to their MCX and MPX and their AR-15s and what have you. They bullied a small company out because they couldn't fight it. This is why JDI, now SAN Imports, Dave Wagner, got an exclusivity with SAN, now SIG, in Switzerland back in 2016, and it has kept him safe for basically a decade now, even though Sig Sauer USA has tried what they could to bully him out because of the legal agreement and because Switzerland isn't really interested in partnering with the U.S. SIG anyway. They just kind of got caught between a rock and a hard place back in 2012, 2013. They would have done it if they could have. I promise you. So I am truly sorry for what happened to Colorado Gun Sales in that instance. I really like Mike over there. He's a buddy. He's the guy who really taught me about the whole SG series long before I met Dave. He's a good guy, and he didn't deserve what happened to him. And those guys who thought they were buying a 5.51A1 that was high quality, like my first one out of the 100, who bought one a couple of years later and got a rattle can, who knows? Now, that's not to say all the guns were bad. SIG still turned out good guns. My Mark 25 is a great pistol, no complaints. My MCX Spear 308 has been a great gun, no complaints. So how is it that they could turn around and make a good gun one day and then ship a horrible gun the next? Lacks to no QC. And that's why I said at the very beginning of the M17, if they can keep their QC up, they'll be fine. Because I believe that the first test pistols, when they were still making them for the military to go, probably exceeded military safety standards. Now you're going to say, what about the drop safety thing? Yes, that was an early concern. And SIG did what all the other makers we've talked about in this video did. They resolved it. After 2017, I think it's safe to say the drop safety issue was fixed, at least as much as anything can be. It was certainly safer than a 1911 Series 70 and before would be. Cool. That's the kind of stuff that early testing reveals and is meant to do to correct it. And that was corrected before those were put into mass issuance. There were only a few in the field when that happened, and it was a known thing, and there you go. That's the right way to do it. Not so good was the voluntary send back that SIG offered to customers, civilians, and police for P320s made before. You could send it in and they would give you the reworked slide and the lightened trigger, but it wasn't mandatory. And this is where it gets a little shaky. Okay, Okay, it's a drop safe issue. You could argue that. Obviously, he was fine. But I saw what happened with the 551A1s. Were they able to produce the M17, M18 in the hundreds of thousands to the same standard that they were the initial couple of thousand pistols? This is where I see the issue. This is why I think my M17 was good, and Jay's M18, made a few years later, had problems. Even if it's maybe not unsafe, I don't think he's ever had any, as they're calling them now, uncommanded discharges. Still, a shit trigger and a really weird and rough slide to frame fit, that shouldn't be a thing, and it is. I smell rain. I wish it would rain. I know the lighting's probably not great now, but I'm not really handling guns. This is just me talking off the cuff. For a couple of years, the drop safety fix seemed to work. You heard this or that. Chris Bartocci rightly said that, the trials and testing weren't completed. We don't know if they should have gone with the Glock or not. There was that. But it seemed to be a little bit of sour grapes from the Glock guys who think that the military should have gone with the Glock submission to the MHS program. And things were relatively quiet through, 2019, 2020, and the 2021. Then there's a slow but gradual ramp up again of claims and counterclaims, lawsuits and countersuits, innuendos, suggestions, back and forth. But this year, 2025, the storm, much like outside here, I hope, seems to have finally broken wide open. There is an issue with the Sig Sauer P320. Absolutely, objectively, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Question is, what is it? We don't know. And I don't just mean mechanical. Even if we prove that the pistol's perfect and it was all user error, there is at the very least an issue with confidence and an issue with this company. We've talked about Colt and the Springfield Armory, the real one, the original, Beretta. Look how they all responded to issues with their guns, even when it wasn't their fault, like with Beretta. They own it and they work with it. Sig's denialism and trying to get social media on their side, it's like the kids say, it gives you the ick. There's something smarmy and wrong there. And there's something wrong with how they got the M17, the M18, now the M7 rifle, the M250, and they got them in record time. And the way trials are done. There's something wrong with all of this. Even if the pistols are perfect, there's something wrong with the procedure. Now, I understand the desire to not have government drag out stuff. There have been times, look how long they took to do the M9, the XM9 trials, the XM10, the XM11, how much time and money. But I feel like we've almost gone the other direction. This is absolutely time for Congress to step in, do their damn jobs, and have an investigation. Just as happened with the M16. Just as happened with the M9. And if they find that Sig is not at fault, fair. But you know what happened in both of those instances? With the M16 and M9? We got a better service weapon. There's no argument that the M16A1 is not a better design than the E1. There's no argument that the 92FS is better than the 92F. That's Congress's job. They need to step in now because I'm not sure I trust the powers that be in the military that are doing these trials. It sure seems like there's some kind of connection between the higher-ups at SIG and those guys. And that's not unprecedented. Colt definitely had more leeway in the past than other companies. And there was definitely an interchange there. And don't get me wrong, I don't think Congress is all that perfect either. Corruption runs rampant everywhere in government. But I'm so tired of Congress, I don't care, Republican or Democrat, feeling like their job is to get sound bites on Fox or MSNBC instead of just buckling down and doing their damn job. This is exactly what they're paid for, and they're paid handsomely. Do it. That's problem number one. And they need not just investigate SIG. They need to investigate the whole trials process. Because we're refining it. As I said earlier, standards today are very different than they were 100 years ago or 50 years ago. It's maybe time that it happens again and we update our standards and practices to reflect the modern military and the modern shooter. These are very different times and very different people in very different situations. Now, what's not as 100% objectively clear, although you can argue it's looking more and more likely, is that there's a design problem or a production problem with the 320, M17, M18. Okay? What is it? And a funny thing happened just a couple of days ago. Two different friends called me. They figured out what's wrong with the gun, and it's repeatable. One little problem. Each guy said something different. And actually said the other one, nah, that's not right. You look on YouTube, you look on reporting sites, the ones that claim to have found the problem, they're different. It's not the same problem being reported here and there. And then you get other people that try to replicate it with their guns. No, I'm not referring to Yankee Marshall. I don't think his are not valid because he has a steel frame gun. He's not even using a polymer. I'm blind and mine are more valid than his, so just stop it. If you don't have the gun to even practice with, just step out. Anyway, at least Military Arms Journal does own the guns. Cool. But if you can't repeat it on your gun, and other guys can on their guns, and if it's different things, that goes back to my original concern. That doesn't suggest to me there's an inherent design flaw in so much as that there's poor quality control. That's the result of poor quality control when things aren't repeatable with different guns, when different issues are reported with different guns. A personal example, Century Arms used to use Hess or Hesse, if you prefer, FAL receivers. The thing is, when they got them in, their quality control was so shitty that they might have 100 receivers all defective, and they were all defective in different ways. One of them might have crooked rails for the bolt. That was mine, actually, were warped. Others didn't have the area for the mag catch machined out right. Others had poor threading for the barrel. Just slipshod. So if you ask me, if we stipulate, and I'm saying if, there's an issue with the 320, I think it's poor quality control. Because that's the only thing that at least somewhat explains how different issues are being reported with different guns and then not other guns. One thing that makes me want to pull my hair out is there's a lot of criticism saying that it's a fully cocked, fully charged striker, and that's the issue. Many other guns have had fully cocked or 99% cocked strikers for a long time. You didn't think I was out here at the cabin without at least one Walther. Now this is the match one. Based on the Poopy Q, this is the PDP. But since those days of the Poopy Q, these have been known for great triggers. And they achieved that by having a fully cocked and ready to go striker. And they're not the only ones. I mean, look at all the Turkish clones based on the Walthers out there. Yeah. That's not it. Now you can say this has a dingus on the trigger. I agree. And what's funny, the very first P99s Walther made did not have the split trigger. They very quickly added it. I wonder why. This does bring me to a point, though. Again, Walther fanboy, fully admitting it. This has been adopted by German KSK as the P14, and I'm hopeful maybe a version will become the replacement for the P8A1. But we have to admit, far fewer PPQs and PDPs have been made compared with the Sig Sauer P320. They have made between 3 and 5 million. Those are the reports I've said. Here's the problem. You make that many guns in such a short time period, we're talking 10 years or less, just by the law of averages, you are going to have some just lemons. And at those numbers, if your failure rate is 0.001 out of 3 to 5 million, talking 30 to 50 pistols, and that's 0.001%. No manufacturer in this day and time, even good ones, make that low a failure rate. You know, a 1% failure rate, pretty good. And those of you in manufacturing can let me know. But I'm not even going to let Sig off the hook on this because they marketed the hell out of the 320. They chose to produce that many this quickly. So they're kind of a victim of their own marketing success, and that's a problem I do have with the Sig Sauer USA way of doing things. They're so into marketing, so into PR, so also into kind of always moving to the next thing, be it ammo or suppressor or the next gun design. I wonder how often they stop and kind of take stock of what they're currently doing, their current customer satisfaction, and their current guns. They seem like they're the kind of company that they're all about making the sale. And then once you've already bought, I'm not sure how much they give a crap about you. Now, this might apply a little differently to military sales, but even then, it only seems like once the U.S. military lost someone, they at least acknowledged a little bit of something, even then, not really. Even when police departments were having reports, not to mention civilians, if this had only remained a civilian issue, they would have never given a flip. I guess what I'm saying is, even if the 320 is perfect and it's completely just user error or bad ammo or whatever, it couldn't have happened to a nicer company, could it have? It's hard to feel sympathy for Sig Sauer Incorporated, isn't it? And I do think that is one of the things. People have bandwagoned against Sig on this. And it's just because they're so unlikable. They're so schmarmy. I don't know. Does that make sense? You know, Palmetto State has had their fair share of quality control issues and recalls and sendbacks. And maybe in more recent years, their reputation on the internet's kind of suffered a bit. But I think one reason that they stayed in good graces with the internet hive mind for so long is they addressed it properly. Their interaction, their customer service, their QC, their warranty was in a manner that really appealed to the internet. So even though they had a much higher return rate than, say, Arsenal, KVAR, because of KVAR's attitude and way of doing things, KVAR had a worse reputation online. Even though I can tell you as a gun dealer, far more PSA guns have gone back than Arsenal guns through KVAR. Internet perception matters, and that's something unique to this era that previous makers did not have to face. They're under a great deal of scrutiny now, and so that's why from the get-go I've taken this with a grain of salt and a bit of a wait-and-see attitude, because the one thing I know is we are not getting the full story. Because it's not possible. There's too much noise right now. There's too much confusion. all along the watchtower can now be playing in your head. I'll give you a minute. You good? Okay, good. Let's wrap this up. I've said my piece. And so I would advise you to step back and realize that there are people that have agendas. Yes, obviously Sig Sauer has the biggest one. Probably many higher-ups in the U.S. government, U.S. military do too, but also people on YouTube do. Even I have agendas. Just realize that as you're analyzing data. Take a step back. I think by this point, it's like opening up your fridge and smelling something funky. You never do that? Or maybe your pantry. You're like, okay, something's gone off. Something's rotten. What is it? We need to go through the soup cans and the boxes and see what it is. But at this point, we just don't know. 100% hand on Bible, we just don't know. Lots of people think they do. Lots of people have gone through the hypothesis and are in the theory stage, but it's not been proven repeatable yet. A lot of people have a lot of personal pet, projects where they think they figured it out, and maybe they have with their gun. But until that issue is repeatable in 10, 20, 50 guns, we just can't say that's it. And if it's not, and if it's different issues, one here, one there, we can still say it's poor QC. We also have to at least face the facts that the 320, the M17, when it comes to the military, is a different gun than the M9, which was a different gun than the M1911. Each time a new service sidearm is issued, you do have safety concerns. There are accidental discharges from folks not used to how it works. I'm not blaming everyone for that. I'm just throwing historical concern in there again. And I don't even think that's probably the factor. But it's such a thing. It's become so trendy. It's become the thing to talk about, the thing to do. And I can't say I'm not interested, but as I said much earlier, history, time will reveal the truth. If there are guilty parties, they will be exposed. If there's a design flaw, it will come to light. If it's just poor QC, that will show itself in time. Right now, I don't know what the exact issue, exact problem is. And you know what? Neither do you. Neither does anyone, as far as I know. Because you would think if SIG knew what it was, well, if they were a normal company, they would say, here it is what it is, we're going to fix it, whatever. But they've got themselves on a corner. If they admit an issue and they say it's a recall, with so many pistols out there, I don't know if financially they can stomach that. And we see this outside. When Beretta had the problems with the M9 or Colt with the M16, it didn't seem to translate over to their other product lines. Now, people seem to have lost confidence in all SIGs. Or rather, they've lost confidence in the company, in its leadership, in its marketing department. That's a much bigger problem, because if SIG has to do a recall, okay, they need money. And if they can sell other products, great. If their sales are slumping, and it's already a bad year for gun sales, where's that money going to come from? One way or the other, this very well could be the end of Sig Sauer USA. Even if the 320 is shown to not be the problem. They themselves have taken a position, a public relations approach, that is distasteful to most people. Is it maybe technically correct from a lawyer speak point of view? Yeah, maybe. People don't like lawyer speak, though, outside of a courtroom. And that's just it, too. You say, oh, they've lost cases here and there. So many of the court cases aren't determined yet. There were a lot of settlements out of court. People who aren't necessarily guilty settle out of court all the time. Well, companies. And even the cases that have been ruled against them in court, Sig is appealing. So we really don't know until all that's settled, all the court cases are settled, what the result will be. It could be that they get overturned or they could be upheld. We don't know. As much as wait and see, be patient, is not the answer the internet wants, it's the only honest, sincere one any of us can give right now. But I don't see how Sig Sauer can come back from this for all the reasons listed. And from all the reasons listed here, they're not my favorite company. But that's okay. I can still like products from companies that I don't necessarily like, and vice versa. There are Walthers that I don't care for. There are Berettas that I don't care for. That's okay. I'm not terribly emotionally attached. I'm not a very emotional buyer in that sense. I hope no one else dies. I hope at least the yellow-orange caution lights on now, or people are being at least careful. There have been a lot of preposterous claims on both sides that just don't hold water. And you wouldn't know that until you actually investigate them. And then you got to figure out which sources to trust. It's really hard to trust Sig, the company, but on the other hand, they do make the guns. They do know more. So we have to take those with a grain of salt. Yeah. Just don't know. Wish I did. But that's some historical context. I hope that helps a little bit. You know, I don't know. It's a very unprecedented situation because of the internet's involvement. It's very unprecedented because of Sig Sauer just not doing what any other company probably would have done in this situation. Then again, what else should I expect from the Kimber kid? Maybe our government should not be buying mass amounts of guns from a company headed by a guy who's technically a criminal in a European nation that's our ally. Funny that. Hold tight. Well, this will all come to light. The answer will come out. Not as quick as we want, not as assured as we want, but it will come out. All I can say is I pray no one else loses, their life or their leg or their testicle. I also submit that Congress should get involved. We should absolutely look at, examine, and revise our testing protocols in the military. And I think we should name one of the testing grounds the Braden Logan testing ground, so that this is never forgotten. We have to make his death count for something. One way or the other, his legacy has to be that safer, better guns are issued to servicemen and police officers and civilians. It's my suggestion anyway. It's about the only conclusion I can come to. Anyway, appreciate you tuning in as I just kind of gave my off-the-cuff opinions. Probably by the time I put this video up, the situation will have changed. Every day, there's new news. With that, please check out Patreon. I've been trying to do a lot more early access over there. If you can't, like, share, and subscribe. And please feel free to debate in the comments, but be respectful of each other. I don't remove comments. If they go away, it's YouTube. So if your comment gets deleted, I didn't do it. But yeah, just be respectful of everyone, because I think most people are just kind of there. But some people have kind of gotten a little, bought in on either side. And everyone will come to their senses. Once the truth comes out, people will have to deal. And if you do carry a 320, for the love of God, just carry something else for right now. Don't even sell it if you don't feel like it. Just retire it to the gun safe. Carry something else. That's kind of the problem on the civilian market. There are too many other guns just like it, if not better. But unfortunately, the military and many police departments don't have a choice. That's their issued gun. So for their sakes, especially, this needs to be figured out. And of course, there are plenty of foreign military users. Or at least there were. I think some of them have suspended things. As of doing this, the military has not suspended use of the M17, M18. The Global Strike Command has suspended as part of the Air Force, but that's just one part of the Air Force. And they have a relatively small number of the pistols. The military at large, as I record this, has not done a recall. Now, of course, they're evaluating their guns. They're enduring inspections. And it'll probably change. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. It's the most up-to-date info I've got. With that, time for me to head in and, you know the deal by now, probably fix some dinner. Appreciate you very much. As always, if you could, participate in the channel. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.